Okay, so welcome to the session on the pre-offer defense mechanism, and visualize yourself to be in a situation where A and T are doing business individually. There is no intention by A, there is no public intention which has been revealed by A to acquire T. So T would like to create a safeguard around itself so that this acts as a demotivation for any acquirer, A1 or A2, to think about T as a potential target. So whatever we are going to talk about are the hedges, let's say the protection around which you have created, let's say as a target, so that the other person is not kind of motivated, let's say, to move forward in this direction. So there are about 8 9 which is given in the core book, so we will try and cover them one by one. So the first is the poison pill. The names are very very rhetoric, in the sense that you would find names as, let's say, the golden parachute, wherein you're asking the management to jump off the plane. So let's say the staggered board, poison put. So so names are pretty interesting, and the concept also is commensurately interesting. What happens in a poison pill? It's like, if let's say someone is trying to force you to do something which you don't want to, so you try and take a poison pill. So it's better to die rather than to get married to, let's say, to person who doesn't whom you don't want to. So pretty much this scenario here. So just pause the video, have a decent read of this particular para so far, and then unpause, and then I hear what I'm trying to say. In case of poison pill, since the offer hasn't been made, whatever we are doing is in precautionary mode. So there are few clauses which company T adds into his agreement with the shareholders. This is all in anticipation, by the way. There is no such visual danger which has become clear. This is all in precaution. So company T, while raising capital from its shareholders, gets into an agreement and adds a clause, and the clause reads as that whenever there is a takeover bid by any acquirer, be it A1 or A2, then let's talk about flippin pill. Then the shareholders would have the right to buy the target's shares, another round of target share, at pretty much a discount. What it does is, let's assume target has got 100 shares, okay, and let's say the market price is prevailing at, let's say, $12. So the total budget to buy the target is $1,200. So any acquirer who has $1,200 in his pocket will be motivated to look at target and, let's say, to absorb it. Now, because there is a flip-in pill, and the flip-in agreement includes that, let's say, 50 more shares can be issued to the existing shareholders at a discount, so that suddenly the capital base of target goes up, becomes 150. At the similar market price, now you need a much larger budget as an acquirer to absorb the target. So because there is a clause already put in, a lot of acquirers, A1 and A2, would not get interested in acquiring the target. Okay, so that's a flip and pill, where the existing shareholders of target are given the right, at the time of issuing their original capital, that in case of and let's say a hostile takeover being becoming clear, the same shareholders would be allowed to buy the target share at a let's say discount. The other, and a very very interesting aspect, although a little impractical, and I haven't seen a lot of examples for that, is a flip over pill. And for that, I'll have to create a situation. T was doing its own business, and on, let's say, 1st January 2016, acquirer bought 15% stake, and let's say making him one of the large shareholders. Therefore, there is a significant influence. Now, target had questioned acquirer as to, would you want to, at a later point in time, would you want to acquire me? Obviously, acquirer did not reveal his intention. He said, no, there is no let's say hostile takeover intention, because target was really not interested into selling himself. So what they do is, since acquirer had already got a foothold in the company, they created obviously with A's permission, they added a clause with their shareholders, and the clause with the same shareholders of the target was that if there is a hostile takeover that will happen, then the shareholders of target would be entitled to buy the shares of A, the person who is one of the investors. So that's your flip over. So in the earlier case, T's shareholder were buying T's share. Now T's shareholder are buying acquirer's share. This must be approved by the acquirer. So what it will do is, the shareholders are going to become the opinion makers of A. They will vote against this acquisition in A's AGM, and therefore it will deter A to acquire target. So therefore, these are a lot of mind games that happen, and these are all precautionary in measure. Okay, so you have, let's say in 2004, the PeopleSoft, one of the leading companies then, was employing a flip-in model. This A is where, which is more common, against Oracle, one of the IT giants, to avoid a multi-billion hostile takeover bid. Very, very interesting aspect. A similar, but yet a little different, is the poison put. Now, poison put, while your poison pill was an agreement with the existing shareholder, your poison put is an agreement with the bondholders. In which case, the bondholders are requested, or let's say their clause reads as that whenever there is a hostile takeover, they are supposed to ask for immediate payment of their sum due. Let me give you an example and tell you how does it act as a deterrent. It's a simple balance sheet wherein the assets are 100, the bonds are, let's say, 40, and the capital is, let's say, 60. So if anyone would want to acquire this company, they need a capital of $60 because they will assume the assets and liability both. So anyone who has $60 in his pocket can look at this target as one of the potential. Now if I issue a poison put, that means the bondholders will ask for immediate payment. That means the potential acquirer will not only has to shell out $60 to buy the overall company, but then after immediately buying, they will have to shell out $40 more. So essentially, they now need a budget of $100 internally to buy this company rather than a budget of 60. So because of the poison put, the cash of the acquirer gets constrained. The overall budget of this entire, just purchase consideration goes up, and therefore act as a deterrent, for any acquirer to look at this particular target. Third is really a theoretical point where there are some state protections wherein companies avoid any hostile takeovers. There are regulatory framework. Fourth and an important one is a staggered board. What is a staggered board? Is basically the rule wherein it says that if, let's say, there are 6 board members and the rotation is 3 years, which basically means that 1/3 of the board is going to retire every year, which is a good mechanism in a way that even if acquirer, because of its let's say a 30% stake into a company, has been able to get onto 2 board positions, still it's going to take 3 years to entirely control the board, because it's only in 1 year your only 2 directors are kind of retiring. To get control over full board, you need all 6 director positions, which can happen only after 3 years. So acquirer will not be able to gain control of the board, which is the main decision maker in terms of the M&As and all that stuff, for at least the initial few years. It's always better to have a staggered board from a M&A standpoint as a protection. Then is the point of the restricted voting rights. Well, this is again something which is not very, very prevalent, because this clearly indicates and gives hint to any let's say investor that the company is very, very conservative. Try and understand in a positive sense that it's not always that an investor will be willing to acquire that particular company in which he's investing into. So company, if it is unnecessarily creating some kind of a safeguard, can sometimes really piss a general investor off. So let's say the company started with A and B, and let's say after 6 months they would like to, let's say, get some capital from C as well, and unnecessarily they are safeguarding itself. So C might be pissed off and C is like, okay, fine, yeah, chuck it, I'm not going to invest into your company at all. So my simple point here is, in case of this restricting voting rights of a shareholder C who has recently acquired their holding above a certain percentage. Let's say C was to get, let's say, 20%, and the cutoff percentage decided was 15. So what this point says is that even though C has acquired 20%, he will be allowed to vote only to the extent of that cutoff. And above that, the voting rights are restricted. So if C has any takeover intentions, then C will, obviously not get interested, because the voting right that he's getting is fairly less. To get into an M&A, you need a lot of support from the shareholders, because finally the deal has to be approved by, it has to be proposed by the board, but finally it has to be ratified by the shareholders. So you need that kind of a support. So if you're not getting that kind of a support, even after spending money, you're spending money equivalent to 20%, but you're getting support, let's say voting rights only to the extent of 15. As a acquirer, let's say I would be a little less tempted to invest into such a company. Okay, again, acts as a good, precautionary mechanism. Point number 6 is simple to understand, that the article of association of the company itself specifies that any kind of an M&A has to be approved by, let's say, 90%. So they come out with a super abnormal percentage, just to ensure that all the shareholders are at the same page, before kind of any such bid. So to convince 90% of the shareholders, either the acquirer has to buy all 90%, or they have to work around it to convince those 90. Again, it's a tedious task compared to, let's say, if that percentage was 50. It is much easier to convince 50% shareholder compared to 90%. Okay. Point number 7, which is the fair price amendment, it basically says that, it is basically, not a protection as such, but it is basically a clause to ensure that a minimum price is at least offered. So, again, like an article of association is going to specify a formula using which, a number can be derived at. This is the minimum value which must be offered. This is not the final value, this is not the purchase consideration, but this just acts as a price floor. It's quite possible that on that day, the market price of the target is way above, and the negotiation is also happening at way above a price. So this acts, it becomes a little irrelevant at that point in time. But sometimes when the target is not doing well, and there is a chance for an acquirer to pick it up, this price floor, acts as a good protection. Okay, so even though the price of the company is, let's say, $10 and the price floor is, let's say, 18, the deal has to happen at 18, ensuring that there is an 80% premium which, let's say, the target is going to get. And therefore, the acquirer is going to be much less motivated, because he knows that he has to pay unnecessary higher amount for something which is valued only 10, he has to pay 18. Again, acts as a precautionary, mechanism to prevent. And the last one here is the golden parachute. Now, the golden parachute is basically, in the context when, let's say, the plane is flying and the plane is now about to crash. Now, in this case, what do you do? I mean, as a management, you are not supposed to, let's say, it depends on, how loyal the management is. So, if the shareholder says that, my dear management, if our company gets into a hostile takeover mode, then we allow you, we give you the power to ask for a very hefty compensation to remove you. So what it does is, typically acquirer would want to have their own management, so they would like to sack the old CEO and get their own new CEO. So this is basically, the golden parachute is a power given to the old CEO to charge very hefty sum, a severance penalty sort of, say, should the acquirer would want to remove it. Of course, if acquirer would want to continue with the old management, they can continue, and therefore, they can avoid paying this amount. But generally what happens is that every time an acquirer or a shareholder would want to, put in his own team, his own, personnel, so that, there is, transparency and all that stuff. So golden parachute, again, is, doesn't deter the acquirer, it just serves the personal purpose of the management to some extent. Okay, so I hope that these 8 points are clear. The good news is that the CFA being a, the MCQ, you're not going to ratify and remember each and every point that you see here. But the bad news is that the case is going to be based on one of those, one of these 8 let's say the points. So your understanding has to be absolutely crystal clear as to when do we call something as flip in and when do we call something as flip over. The rights of shareholder to buy T or rights of the shareholder to buy the acquirer. So these are the finer points that you have to always remember in a case study, because that's where the application gets tested. Okay, so looking forward to speak to you in my next session, wherein we're going to focus on the post offer defense mechanism, easier module to handle. Okay, so thank you very much. Stay tuned.